We were just talking through the commercial break, and you were sharing something very important, Larry. Go right ahead.
Yeah, you have to understand that the circumstances that confronted these black airmen as they entered the Tuskegee experiment and later combat was a world that was rigid against African Americans. Black people were second-class citizens in this country, just as they'd been for the 400 years prior when slavery began here. Those attitudes prevailed. Even the War College in 1925 had issued a report saying that black men were intellectually incapable of operating complex machinery. And so it was ridiculous to think that they could operate a fighter plane or a bomber plane or anything of that nature. And as a result, the majority of African Americans who served in combat didn't serve in the elite kind of environments that the Tuskegee Airmen proved that African Americans could function in and succeed and do historic, heroic things that turned the course of the war. But Uncle George will pardon me. He's Uncle George to me.
Well, go right ahead.
You were talking about how that played out in other branches of the service.
Well, the thing is, when World War II started, the services were rigidly segregated. The Army had some all-black units. The enlisted people were all black, but the officers, some were black, but the senior officers usually were white. But the Army had those ever since shortly after the Civil War. They had these units, and they still existed, like the cavalry units. See?
Oh, like the Buffalo Soldiers?
Buffalo Soldiers,
yes.
Yeah. They existed. One of my classmates was a Buffalo Soldier, but Hurd was his name. But he came from he rode horses, say, and then started flying a plane. But the thing is, when we went in, the Air Corps had no Afro-Americans in it at all, Army Air Corps. The Navy, they had no officers Afro-American, and the only way an enlisted person could enlist in the Navy was to be a mess attendant, dealing with food. They wouldn't take him in any category. And my brother, he and two friends went in, and they made him a cook, see. And I wanted to go into service, and my father said, no. He sat me down and talked to me about it, and I decided no, see. But that's the way it was, the Navy at that time. And the Navy didn't change that policy. I guess toward the end of the war, they had suddenly 12 or 13 Afro-Americans were commissioned finally in the Navy.
Wow.
But the policy of other branches, other jobs in the Navy, to end the war, the Navy was originally segregated, see.
And that did. I think they were one of the last ones to finally
That's right.
kind of loosen the reins there a little bit and open up.
A lot of people don't realize that, see.
Yes.
So the services were originally segregated, see.
Key figure in all of this was General B.O. Davis, correct?
What do you mean a key figure?
He was kind of a leader. He was a visionary who was standing head and shoulders above everybody else in the fray at that time.
But he was caught in it too. B.O. Davis, he graduated from West Point in '36, and he wanted to fly, but we had no black people flying, so he did not become could not get into aviation until they started the Tuskegee Airmen. And he ended up in the first class, see. And he became our leader because of that. But at West Point, he roomed separately. He was by himself most of the time, see. And most of the cadets would not speak to him, see. It's one of those things. They gave him the silent treatment almost the entire 4 years. And the Army let that happen, see. So it was tough.
I mean, yeah. It's amazing to see what you had to trudge through. And I'm sure you're very modest like Larry. I'm sure that there has been so much that you probably you wouldn't be able to record half of the incidences, and B, there are other incidents.
A lot of people don't realize these things are going to happen. It was 1953. I was at Fort Worth, living in Fort Worth, Carswell Air Force Base. Carswell had so crowded with people, had so many people there, and I had to send over there to become part of to train for a new group in B-36 aircraft. That was the biggest aircraft we had. And my wife, we had 3 little kids under 5, so, and I found I was number 2 on the housing list. And I said, great. And they called me that afternoon and said, are you colored? I said, yes, why?
Oh,
And they said, well, you can't move into base housing. Oh,
Really?
I went down to find out that Carswell had a lot of people, but it was area-wise, it was very small. They had a large housing complex authorized because of the number of people, but didn't have space to put it. So they built it west of Carswell in a town called White Settlement, Texas. See?
Of all
And,
places.
Yeah, and they said the laws of White Settlement in Texas didn't allow white and colored families to live together. See? And so I protested that. I ended up in the office of the base commander. See, I was a captain, and we didn't settle anything. But the next day, I was transferred to a new group. This is the end of February of 53. This new group had orders to ship out on the 15th of March, and I suddenly became part of that group and left the 15th of March. See, I remember when I got home, they were going to Limestone, Maine, and orders, but there's no housing up there for families. And so they're going 90 days TDY. And suddenly I'm part of that group going to Limestone, Maine. I went home to my wife, B, and I said, look, we're in deep trouble now. And she said, well, I'll go anywhere with you, but I'm not going to stay here without you. Picked up the phone, called the mother Mobile. And mother said, come on down. So I put a house stuff in storage, drove her down, came back, and then went to the 8th Air Force, was the major command. I talked to the general personnel about what happened, and I didn't get to see him, but I found someone who eventually got me I got my first degree at Institute of Technology some years later, and he told me I could do that, so I left, and 2 years later, I got into the Institute of Technology. And so moving up to Limestone sort of was a breakthrough for me, but the fact that I couldn't move into base housing, military base housing, in 1953, see,
Oh, my
because it was
goodness.
built off base, see,
Wow.
and that was something in the service.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't remember a lot, but I remember a few things. I remember helping to break some color lines in Chicago and getting in the parks, and my sisters having to break the line to get into high schools and things like that. And there is a certain feeling that one has when you are being treated in a way that's different. And
But things change. You know, that lieutenant colonel who pulled me off that airplane in 1950. In 1960, I was a major in Plattsburgh, New York. I was a squadron commander, A&E Maintenance Squadron. He was my wing commander, that same officer. Suddenly, he was a wing commander. He wouldn't speak to me on Guam and Okinawa. But those 2.5 years with him then was two of the best years of my career the second time. I love working for him the second time. See?
How did you find yourself in Vietnam?
Oh, that was 1969, 70. And I was the lieutenant colonel then, and I was the detachment commander in Vietnam. So things have changed. You know, in World War II, one of the things was they never put an Afro-American over a Caucasian.
yes.
That was a thing, but
Correct.
then it had changed during the time when I was a detachment commander, and all my pilots and whatnot were Caucasian. I had a few Afro-American gunners and whatnot, but that's about it.
Which brings us to the real significance of why we're having this conversation today. So what was it that the African American squadrons did that made them exceptional in such a way that they were actually able to receive a congressional honor from the president?
Well, let me put it this way. I never look at it as they were exceptional. They were as good as anybody else. That's the way I looked at it. We
Okay.
could do a job as good as anybody else.
Okay.
Colonel Davis was an exceptional leader, see,
All right.
and he made sure we followed the rules, you know. And we stick with the bombers, And so we had the lowest loss rate
And that
of
is
any of the groups. We lost about 26, 27
out of all of the
on
groups.
all the missions, see. But we did have a period of over 100 where we didn't lose anyone, see. But we lost the major portion of that on one particular mission. We didn't have enough airplanes, see, and we lost one particular mission. It was over about 10 missions that we lost the 26 or 27 planes, see. But we had a long string where we didn't lose any.
Amazing.
Because Colonel Davis said, stick with the bombers. A lot of the white groups, if they saw the German airplane, they would tack it when a German airplane went away, they would follow it until they shot it down, see. And when it came back, they might not find the bombers. They'd moved on, see. So the bombers may end up going miles without sufficient coverage of fighters, see. Then another German group could hit them, see. But Colonel Davis said, if that airplane leaves, let him go, you stick with the bombers. So we had a lower loss rate because of that.
Larry, you had a question.
Well, I was just going to talk about, for a moment, the legacy, the lesson that the Tuskegee Airmen's experience in history provides to those of us who've benefited from your service.
Well, yeah, it's right. Well, let's look at it. It was the Air Force that decided to integrate first. 7 months after they were created, they, in fact, they started a study a few months after they were created about that very thing. And 7 months after their creation, they announced publicly they're going to do away with racial segregation on assignments. And 3 months later, President Truman signed the executive order directing that.
Wow.
For the other services too.
Now, the 332nd ended right about then, correct?
No, the 332nd ended in 49. The Air Force's plan was approved in May of 49, and by the end of June, the Air Force deactivated the 332nd and at Lockburn, and within weeks, all the people there received orders to white groups around the world. See?
But the 332nd was recommissioned, wasn't it? At some
It
point?
was deactivated later. It became a unit over in the wars in the Iraq and whatnot. The expeditionary group, things like that. But each of the squadron, the 99th, the 100th, and other, are on active duty today, see. 99th is a training squadron. And in Alabama, there's a 100th. And they have red tail airplanes, see.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
The reason I brought up the 332nd was because I saw a piece on the 332nd where they, as a matter of their identity, honor the Tuskegee Airmen because of the place in history
Well, each of the
that they occupy.
Each of the squadrons under the 332nd are on active duty today. They've been reactivated,
Yeah.
see. But they're integrated at white groups, basically. So.
Well, let's just talk about the awards briefly. You received the 8th Air Force Trophy for the AMS Squadron. Is that correct?
Oh, that was when I was a maintenance squadron commander.
Okay.
When I left, we had the 8th Air Force Trophy for the best A&E squadron. The individual awards, that's 8th Air Force, that's just local stuff. It's a big trophy, and we keep it until someone else wanted to see. But it was an honor, and that was under the Colonel Miller, who wouldn't speak to me on Guam.
Wow.
I worked for him then, see. And so, yeah, I had a good time up there at Plattsburgh.
And there's a myriad of other awards as well. From what I understand, there's the your decorations include the Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor Award, the Air Medal with 11 oak leaf clusters, which we have to talk about later because we're out of time.
Okay.
But we just want to say congratulations, because the awards not only speak for themselves, but you right here in the studio telling your story, not history or his story, but your story. And we can't be more honored to have you here to share that with us.
Well,
Larry, I'm speechless and thankful and grateful, ever so grateful for helping to get that legacy out there to so many people who just have no idea. So both of you, with just seconds left before we leave, I just want to again just extend a special congratulations, even at this very late date, decades later, for all of your work, all of the things that you had to go through that people have absolutely no idea, the struggle, the challenges, and making that mark in history. That is so significant.
Okay.
So we're going to go ahead and close out, and I just want to say thank you again and again. Larry, as usual, is what can I say?
My pleasure.
You mean that's the end of it?
This is the end. We are done. We're
I
out
didn't
of
get to throw
time.
in my thing.
Well, say whatever you need to say very quickly.
We're off the air now.
Oh, well, we're going to save you a few more seconds. Go right
Okay,
ahead,
go ahead.
Colonel.
You finish.
No, you go.
Huh?
Go.
I
Let's
tell
share
them
something
how-
with the Variety Talk family.
Larry's father was classes behind me. I'd come back from overseas and I was a senior pilot at Tuskegee. But 1 month I got grounded for acrobatics in the area, so I couldn't go on cross countries. And his father saw me in the officers club and said, "Come on and go to Talladega with me." And so I went up to Talladega, and his father introduced me to his girlfriend, who was his mother, say. But his girlfriend introduced me to his sister, who I married the following year.
So that's how we became family.
Well, you know what? I'm just happy it all came together.
too.
I'm so happy it came together. Thank you again for joining us. And Variety Talk family, you have it live right here. You've been sitting in on our Tuskegee Airmen celebration honoring the lieutenant today. And so we're out of time. Lieutenant Colonel,
Right.
excuse me, Lieutenant Colonel. How do we not do that? And make sure everybody you join us next week because we've got a very, and we also want to say make sure you get to Madison, Wisconsin for the concert with our wonderful Sam. Okay, so anyway, we're out of time. This is Variety Talk live from Las Vegas. You've been sitting in with Linda Leak, and we will see you next Thursday at 5 p.m. Take care.